During lunch, my granddaughter laughed and said, "It would have been better if you hadn't come back from the hospital." I smiled, but when I froze the college fund, the tears came fast. The words hung in the air like a thick fog, but I kept the smile plastered on my face. Around us, the dining room buzzed with conversation and the clinking of silverware. Rebecca, my daughter, hadn't even noticed what her 16-year-old Ella had just said to me. Or perhaps she had and chose to ignore it, which somehow felt worse. Carefully set down my fork beside the barely touched turkey on my plate. My appetite had vanished the moment I'd arrived at Rebecca's house for Thanksgiving dinner and realized there wasn't a place set for me at the table. "Oh, Mom," Rebecca had exclaimed when she opened the door, her surprise seeming a bit too genuine. "I wasn't sure you'd make it after. After my cancer surgery 3 weeks ago. The surgery that had removed a tumor from my colon and left me weak but grateful to be alive." Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. The surgery that my daughter had visited me for exactly once, staying only 15 minutes before claiming she needed to pick up Ella from volleyball practice. "I told you I was coming," I said softly, clutching the homemade cranberry sauce I'd struggled to prepare that morning. My hands were still weak, the fatigue from chemotherapy making even simple tasks exhausting. Rebecca had shuffled awkwardly in the doorway. "Right, of course. Come in. We'll set you a place." And they had, a folding chair wedged into the corner of the dining room table, a mismatched plate and set of utensils hastily arranged. I sat there now, the chair slightly lower than everyone else's, making me feel like a child at the adults' table. Daniel, my son-in-law, was deep in conversation with his brother about football. Rebecca was fussing over my 12-year-old grandson, Liam cutting his turkey into smaller pieces, though he was perfectly capable of doing it himself. And Ella, my once sweet granddaughter who used to crawl into my lap for stories, was texting under the table, only looking up occasionally to make some sarcastic remark, until she'd looked at me and said those words. "It would have been better if you hadn't come back from the hospital." I'm 65 years old. I've been a nurse for 40 years before retiring last year. I've held the hands of dying patients, delivered babies in emergency situations, and told families their loved ones were gone. I've been through a divorce, raised Rebecca alone, buried my parents, and now fought cancer, yet nothing had prepared me for the casual cruelty of those words from my own granddaughter's mouth. "Ella," Daniel finally said, apparently having heard the comment. "That's not appropriate." Ella rolled her eyes. "What? Grandma knows I'm joking. Right, Grandma?" All eyes turned to me, and I did what I've always done. I smiled and nodded. "Of course, sweetheart." Rebecca gave a nervous laugh. "Mom's tough as nails. She knows Ella has that dark sense of humor." And just like that, it was dismissed. They returned to their conversations, their football, their phones. I was invisible again. I excused myself, quietly to use the restroom, though no one seemed to notice. In the hallway, I paused by the family photos lining the wall. There was Rebecca's wedding, Liam's birth, Ella's elementary school graduation, last year's Christmas card photo. I wasn't in a single one. Not even the photo from Liam's baptism, where I had actually been present, standing just outside the frame apparently. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection. My hair was growing back after the chemotherapy, short silver wisps covering my scalp. The face that looked back at me was tired, yes, but still here, still alive. Despite what my granddaughter might have preferred, I thought about the college funds I'd established for both Ella and Liam when they were born. Every month for 16 years, I'd faithfully deposited money into those accounts. Even when I was diagnosed with cancer and the medical bills started mounting, I never touched those funds. They were sacred, my legacy for my grandchildren's futures. "Mom," Rebecca said the moment I opened the door, "we need to talk about what you've done." I stepped aside, watching them barrel past me into my living room, the house I'd lived in for 30 years, where I'd raised Rebecca alone. "Would you like some tea?" I asked. "We don't want tea," Rebecca snapped. "We want to know why you froze." "The kids' college funds." I folded my hands in my lap. I didn't realize I needed permission to make decisions about my own money. Daniel paced by the window. "Virginia, be reasonable. Those accounts were for Ella and Liam's education. Can't I?" I interrupted. "Those accounts are in my name. They're gifts I intended to give, not obligations." Rebecca's face flushed. So you're punishing the kids because you got your feelings hurt at Thanksgiving? That's childish. I felt the urge to apologize, to smooth things over, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was the memory of Ella's casual cruelty, or that folding chair crammed into the corner of the table. Is that what you think happened? I asked quietly. That I got my feelings hurt? Well, obviously, Rebecca threw up her hands. Ella made one tasteless joke, and we've talked to her about it. Daniel used his reasonable lawyer tone. Kids say thoughtless things. Surely you don't think she meant it. I stood up. Whether she meant it isn't the point. Neither of you saw anything wrong with how I was treated. Not just by Ella, but by all of you. Rebecca rolled her eyes. What are you talking about? There wasn't even a place set for me at the table. I told you weeks ago I was coming. We added, a place. It's not like we made you eat in the kitchen. I wasn't in a single family photo on your wall. Not one. Are you seriously counting photos now? This is ridiculous. When was the last time you called me just to check in? Not because you needed something? A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. I've been busy, Mom. Too busy to visit me more than once during my 3-week hospital stay. Daniel stepped in the urine. Virginia, we all have our own lives. We can't just drop everything because I had cancer. I finished. Because I might have died on that operating table. The room fell silent. Rebecca's voice softened to a patronizing tone. Mom, you're overreacting. Nobody wants you to die. Ella was just making a stupid joke. A joke that you laughed at, I pointed out. A joke that you defended. It wasn't that serious, she exploded. I retrieved a folder from my desk. Inside were bank statements showing every deposit to the college. Funds over 16 years. Also copies of checks for their house down payment, Rebecca's car loan, Liam's private school tuition. I have never asked for anything in return for these gifts. But love isn't the same as being a doormat. Daniel's face reddened. So this is about money. You're keeping score. No, I said firmly. This is about respect. About being treated like a person with feelings, not an ATM or a free babysitter. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears of frustration. I can't believe you're doing this to us. We haven't been through life as a family. I went through cancer alone. I've been alone for a very long time, even when I'm sitting at your table. So, unfreeze the accounts, she demanded. And we can pretend this never happened. I shook my head. I can't do that. Can't or won't, Daniel challenged. Both. The accounts will remain frozen until I see real change in how this family treats me. Rebecca grabbed her purse. Fine, keep your money, but don't expect to be welcome in our home. In the past, this threat would have devastated me, but something had shifted. I wasn't welcome yesterday, I said softly. I'm not sure I ever truly have been. They left without another word. I sank into my armchair, expecting tears, expecting regret. Instead, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. I had spoken my truth without filtering it through the lens of peacekeeping. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. I hope you're happy now. Ella is crying. I set the phone aside and looked around my quiet living room. This space was mine, filled with choices I'd made for myself. When was the last time I'd made a choice solely for my own happiness? That evening, I made myself a proper dinner with my good china, wine, and a candle. As I ate, I thought about my years as a nurse, caring for strangers with more compassion than my family had shown me. Would my parents recognize the woman I'd become, so eager to please that I'd erased my own needs? After dinner, I took out a notebook and began to write patterns I'd allowed, always available for babysitting, canceling my own plans, contributing financially whenever asked, accepting being left out of family events, minimizing my health concerns to avoid burdening them, making holidays special for everyone while my preferences were ignored. The list grew longer. The time Rebecca and Daniel claimed they couldn't afford to take the kids on their cruise, so I watched them for a week. The Christmas when my gift was a mug that said "World's okayest mom," while I'd spent months finding thoughtful presents, I'd been teaching them how to treat me. My needs came last. The college funds would remain frozen, not as punishment, but as a boundary. No apology had come from Rebecca, just accusation. They expected me to cave, to follow the pattern of sacrificing my dignity for family harmony. Not this time. I registered for a painting class at the community center. Art had been my passion before responsibilities took over. For once, I wouldn't check if anyone needed me before doing something for myself. That night, looking in the mirror, the woman staring back seemed different. Still tired from cancer treatment, but her eyes held something new. Resolve, perhaps. Perhaps. Or simply the recognition of her own worth. It would have been better if you hadn't come back from the hospital, Ella had said. No, I thought. It would have been better if I had come back as someone new. And perhaps, in a way, I had. The next morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect late November day. I dressed carefully for my painting class, choosing clothes that were comfortable but made me feel good. Not the faded, practical garments I usually wore for family gatherings where spills and sticky grandchild hands were inevitable. As I gathered my purse and keys, the phone rang. Rebecca again. My hand hesitated over the receiver before I made another choice. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever crisis or complaint or accusation she had could wait. Today was for me. The community center was housed in a converted Victorian mansion at the edge of town, its rooms bright with tall windows and warm woodwork. I felt a flutter of nervousness as I approached the art studio, hearing voices and laughter from within. What if I was terrible at painting? What if everyone else was younger, more talented? What if I stopped myself? These were the old thoughts, the ones that had kept me small and accommodating for too long. Today, being terrible at painting was allowed. Today, I didn't need to excel to deserve taking up space. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The studio was filled with easels arranged in a semicircle, most already occupied by people of various ages. A slender woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from adjusting her canvas and smiled warmly. "You must be Virginia," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Margaret, the instructor. We're so glad you've joined us." "Thank you," I said, surprised at how genuine her welcome felt. "It's been a very long time since I've painted." "Then you're in exactly the right place," Margaret replied, guiding me to an empty easel by the window. "This is where we remember the parts of ourselves we've set aside for too long." As I settled in, arranging my brushes and paints, a strange sensation washed over me, like meeting an old friend after years apart, the conversation resuming as if no time had passed. The blank canvas before me wasn't intimidating. It was an invitation. Margaret moved to the center of the room. "Today, we're not focusing on technique or perfection," she announced. "Today, we're painting feelings. Choose a color that represents how you feel right now, in this moment, and let it guide you." I stared at the palette of colors before me. What did I feel? Anger at my family, sadness for the years of being taken for granted, relief at finally standing up for myself. My hand reached for a deep blue, rich and vibrant. Not the color of sadness as I might have expected, but of depth, of sky, of possibility. As the brush touched canvas, something unlocked inside me. I painted without plan or purpose, just movement and color and the quiet joy of creation. Around me, others did the same. The room filled with the gentle sounds of brushstrokes and occasional murmurs of encouragement. "Beautiful," Margaret said softly when she paused behind me. "You've done this before." I looked at my canvas, surprised by what had emerged. An abstract landscape of sorts, blues and purples giving way to hints of gold at the edges. It wasn't technically impressive, but it was honest. "I used to paint in college," I admitted. "Before life got busy." Margaret nodded knowingly. Life has a way of making us forget what feeds our souls, but it's never too late to remember. By the end of class, my shoulders ached from the unaccustomed movement, but it was a good ache, the kind that comes from growth rather than burden. As I cleaned my brushes, Margaret approached again. "A few of us usually grab coffee after class," she said. "Would you like to join?" My instinct was to decline, to rush home and check my messages, to make myself available in case I was needed. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'd like that very much." The coffee shop was a small, independent place I'd driven past countless times but never entered. We claimed a round table by the window, Margaret, myself, and 3 others from the class. They introduced themselves. Thomas, a retired history teacher, Diane, a widow who'd moved to town last year, and Jean, a former accountant who'd taken up painting after a stroke-forced early retirement. "First day impressions?" Margaret asked me as we settled with our drinks. It felt, I searched for the right word, freeing. Diane nodded. "That's exactly it. When my Harold died, everyone had opinions about how I should grieve, what I should do with his things, when I should move on. Painting was the first thing I did just for me, with no one else's expectations attached. Family can be the worst for that," Jean added. "Mine still treats me like I'm made of glass since the stroke. I'm not allowed to have bad days because it scares them, and I'm not allowed to have too many good days because then they think I'm cured and stop checking in. I felt a shock of recognition. Yes, I said quietly. It's like they decide who you are. When I returned to the table, they were serving dessert. No one had waited for me. Oh, Mom, we thought you might be resting, Rebecca said when she noticed me standing there. You know how you get tired these days. I sat back down in my too small chair. I'm fine. You barely touched your food, Rebecca pointed out, as if I were the problem. Do you want some pie? It's store-bought. I didn't have time to make one from scratch this year. Every Thanksgiving for the past 15 years, I had baked 3 pies for this family. Even last year, when I was in the middle of my first round of chemo, I dragged myself to the kitchen and made pumpkin, apple, and pecan, Rebecca's favorite. Just a small piece, thank you, I said. As Rebecca cut the pie, Ella was showing Daniel something on her phone, both of them laughing. So I need about $2,000 for the senior trip, she was saying. Everyone's going to Cabo for spring break. Daniel sighed. We've talked about this, Ella. We don't have that kind of money right now. But Dad, she whined, it's not fair. All my friends are going. Maybe Grandma can help, Liam piped up innocently. Grandma always has money for stuff. The table fell silent. Rebecca shot Liam a look that silenced him instantly. Mom doesn't need to be worried about that, she said tightly. She has her own expenses now. With all those hospital bills, Ella added with a smirk, it's a wonder Grandma can even afford pie. That was the moment something broke inside me. Not in a dramatic, shattering way, more like the quiet snap of a thread that had been pulled too tight for too long. I finished my pie, slowly, methodically. I thanked Rebecca for the meal, hugged my grandchildren, even Ella, who stiffened at my touch, and declined Rebecca's half-hearted offer to stay for coffee. I should get home before dark, I said. My night vision isn't what it used to be. No. One offered to drive me, though my house was only 15 minutes away. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, my hands trembling slightly as I logged into my bank account. The college funds for Ella and Liam were substantial. Now, almost enough for 4 years at a state university for each of them. I stared at the screen for a long time. I thought about all the birthdays where my gifts were received with barely concealed disappointment, the times I'd changed my plans to babysit, only to have Rebecca and Daniel come home hours later than promised, without so much as a thank you. The holidays where I was clearly an afterthought, if thought of at all. I thought about Ella's words. It would have been better if you hadn't come back from the hospital. And then, with 3 careful clicks, I froze both college accounts. The next morning, my phone exploded with calls and texts. I let them go to voicemail. I was in my garden, planting tulip bulbs for a spring I was now determined to see. When the Ishta doorbell rang shortly after noon, I wasn't surprised to see Rebecca and Daniel on my porch, their faces masks of righteous indignation. Mom, Rebecca said the moment I opened the door, we need to talk about what you've done. The community center sat on Maple Street, a Victorian building with tall windows that let in streams of morning light. I arrived early for the painting class, nervousness fluttering in my stomach. First time? Asked a silver-haired woman setting up an easel beside mine. Is it that obvious? I smiled. I'm Margaret. She extended her hand. First-day jitters are universal. Margaret had been painting for 5 years, starting after her husband died. It saved me, she said simply. Her quiet confidence was infectious, and my anxiety began to fade. The instructor, a younger woman named Delia, began class with a simple exercise, painting emotions through color and shape. No technique, just feeling. I chose blue and began with hesitant strokes that gradually became more confident. As I painted, memories surfaced. The pattern that had led me here wasn't new. It had been building for years, small moments of erasure piling up until I could no longer ignore them. Rebecca had always been a willful child, even before her father left when she was 7. After the divorce, she became my whole world. I worked. Double shifts at the hospital, went without new clothes, skipped meals, whatever it took to give her a stable life. The sacrifices seemed worth it when she got into college, the first in our family. I remortgaged the house to help with tuition. I'll pay you back someday, Mom, she'd promised. That someday never came. When she married Daniel, I gave them money for a down payment on their house. Money that was supposed to be my retirement fund. I told myself it was what mothers did. Love meant sacrifice. But when had sacrifice become erasure? Erasure. Ella was born when Rebecca was 28. I fell in love with my granddaughter instantly, rearranging my work schedule to help with childcare. Liam followed 4 years later. I retired early, partly to help more with the kids. The pattern solidified. Slowly. Rebecca would call with an emergency. Daniel was working late. Ella had a dance recital. Could I pick up Liam from school? I always said yes, even when it meant canceling my own plans. The first time I said no, when I had tickets to a concert I'd been looking forward to for months, Rebecca's response was chilling. I thought grandmothers were supposed to want to spend time with their grandchildren, she'd said. I guess we know where your priorities lie. I canceled the concert. The pattern continued. There was the Thanksgiving when they forgot to tell me they were traveling to Daniel's parents until 3 days before, after I'd already bought all the ingredients for dinner. The Christmas when my gift to Ella, a handmade quilt I'd spent months creating, was tossed aside for the store-bought tablet from her parents. Then my diagnosis came. Stage 2 colon cancer. The day I told Rebecca, she listened with appropriate concern, promised to be there for me, then immediately asked if I could still watch the kids that weekend because she and Daniel had tickets to a wine tasting. I said yes. I always said yes. After surgery, when I was still weak and in pain, Rebecca visited once. She brought the kids, who were bored and restless in the hospital room. They stayed 20 minutes. When I was discharged, she was swamped at work, so I took a taxi home. During 6 weeks of chemotherapy, I drove myself to and from appointments. Rebecca called occasionally to check in, but the conversations always circled back to when I could resume babysitting or whether I could contribute to Ella's summer camp fees. Remarkable, Delia said, pausing behind me. I blinked, pulled from my memories. My canvas was covered in swirls of blue and purple, with small bursts of yellow light breaking through. I've never painted before, I admitted. Sometimes the hand knows what the heart needs to express, Delia replied. This has real emotion. After class, Margaret invited me for coffee at a small cafe across the street. How did it feel? She asked as we settled at a corner table. Liberating, I said. Like I could breathe again. Margaret nodded. I recognize that look. I call it the finally standing up for yourself glow. I laughed. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been there. She stirred her coffee. Family? I hesitated, then found myself telling her everything. The Thanksgiving dinner, Ella's comment, freezing the college funds. Good for you, Margaret said when I finished, surprising. Me setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. My daughter thinks I'm being childish and vindictive. Of course she does, Margaret replied. You've changed the rules of a game she was winning. On the drive home, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I'd told my story without softening the edges, without making excuses for Rebecca's behavior. And instead of judgment, I'd found understanding. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Rebecca. I didn't call back. That evening, I pulled out old photo albums. There I was, a young nurse in my crisp uniform. There was Rebecca's father before he left us. Pictures of Rebecca growing up, her first day of school, high school graduation, wedding, day. Then I noticed something. As the years progressed, there were fewer photos of me. In recent family pictures, I was often behind the camera, not in the frame. Slowly, systematically, I had been erasing myself to make room for everyone else's needs. Not anymore, I whispered to the empty room. I picked up the phone and made a call, not to Rebecca, but to the travel agency. The trip to the Grand Canyon I'd been putting off for 15 years. I booked it for next month. When I hung up, I felt something unfamiliar. Pride. Not for what I'd given, but for what I was finally claiming for myself. The pattern was broken. 2 weeks passed without a word from Rebecca. I attended 4 painting classes, had coffee with Margaret after each one, and finalized my Grand Canyon trip details. The silence from my daughter was both a relief and a weight, a familiar contradiction that I was learning to carry. Then, on a Tuesday evening while I was preparing dinner, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Liam standing on my porch, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Grandma," he said, his 12-year-old face serious. "Can I stay here tonight?" I ushered him inside. "Does your mother know you're here?" He nodded. "She dropped me off. She and Dad are fighting, and Ella's being mean." My heart squeezed. Despite everything, this child still sought safety with me. "Are you hungry? I'm making spaghetti." His face brightened. "With your special sauce? Is there any other kind?" While we ate, Liam told me about school, his science project on volcanoes, how his soccer team had won their last game. Normal conversation, untouched by the tension between me and his mother. Mom says you're not coming to holidays anymore, he said suddenly, twirling pasta around his fork. I set down my glass carefully. Did she explain why? She said, "You're mad about something Ella said." Of course, that would be Rebecca's version. It's more complicated than that, Liam. He looked up, his eyes serious beyond his years. Ella shouldn't have said that about you not coming back from the hospital. That was mean. My breath caught. Thank you for saying that. I was scared when you were in the hospital, he admitted quietly. Mom said you'd be fine, but I heard her telling Dad that your cancer was serious. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm doing much better now. I'm glad, he said simply. Then, are you still mad at Mom? I'm not mad, Liam. I searched for words a 12-year-old might understand. I'm learning to take care of myself the way I've always taken care of everyone else. He seemed to consider this. Like when they tell you on airplanes to put on your own oxygen mask first. I smiled at his perfect analogy. Exactly like that. After dinner, I helped him with his homework, then set him up in the guest room that had once been Rebecca's. As I tucked him in, something he would have protested at home but seemed to welcome here, he asked, "Will you still be my grandma even if you and Mom are fighting?" My heart broke a little. I will always be your grandma, Liam, no matter what. The next morning, Rebecca arrived to pick him up. She stood awkwardly on the porch, not meeting my eyes. Thanks for taking him. He's my grandson, I said simply. He's always welcome here. She nodded stiffly. Daniel and I were working through some things. I didn't ask for details. It wasn't my place anymore. Liam's a good boy. You've done well with him. Surprise flickered across her face at the compliment. For a moment, I glimpsed the uncertain young mother she'd once been, seeking my approval. But the moment passed, her expression hardening. The kids keep asking about Christmas, she said. It's only a month away. I'll be away for Christmas, I replied. I'm taking a trip to the Grand Canyon. Her eyes widened. During the holidays? By yourself? Yes. No explanation, no apology. She looked like she wanted to say more, but Liam appeared in the doorway. Ready, Mom? The tension between us lingered, unresolved. But something had shifted, a small crack in the wall of her certainty. After they left, I called Margaret. We'd fallen into the habit of checking in with each other between classes. Liam stayed over last night, I told her. Rebecca and Daniel are having problems. Are you being pulled back in? Margaret asked, her concern evident. No, I said, surprising myself with my certainty. I love my grandson, but I'm not going to rescue Rebecca from her marriage problems. Good, Margaret said. Remember, you can love someone without sacrificing yourself. That afternoon, I visited my oncologist for a follow-up appointment. My scans were clear, my blood work improving. You're doing remarkably well, Dr. Patel said. Whatever changes you've made, keep making them. On my way home, I stopped at an art supply store and bought my own easel, canvases, and paints. I set them up in the spare bedroom, transforming it into a small studio with natural light from the east-facing window. Standing there, surrounded by creative possibility, I felt a surge of joy so unexpected it brought tears to my eyes. For decades, I'd convinced myself that my happiness was dependent on my family's happiness, that I could only feel fulfilled if they were thriving. Now I was discovering a simpler truth. Joy could be found in a quiet room with a blank canvas, an afternoon light. That evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, the phone rang. I expected Margaret, but it was Daniel. Virginia, he said, his lawyer's composure nowhere in evidence. I need your help. My old instincts surged, the need to rush in, to fix things, to be needed. I took a breath. What's going on, Daniel? Rebecca's mother had a car accident. Nothing serious, but she's at Memorial Hospital. Rebecca's with her, but the kids need somewhere to go, and I have a client meeting I can't reschedule. I closed my eyes. The familiar pattern beckoned. Drop everything, be the safety net, put my needs last. I can watch them, I said finally. But I have a painting class tomorrow morning that I won't cancel. You'll need to pick them up by 8:30. Silence. This wasn't the unconditional yes he expected. Painting class? He asked, confusion evident. Yes, at the community center. Another pause. I should be able to make that work. Good, I said. When will you bring them over? 20 minutes later, Ella and Liam arrived. Ella avoided my eyes, staring at her phone with exaggerated interest. Liam gave me a quick hug. There's leftover lasagna in the fridge, I told them. Make yourselves at home. Ella finally looked up. Mom said Grandma Sharon will be fine. I nodded. That's good news. An awkward silence fell. I'd never felt so distant from my granddaughter. This girl I'd once rocked to sleep, whose first steps had been toward my outstretched arms. I've been painting, I said suddenly. Would you like to see my studio? Liam nodded eagerly. Even Ella looked up from her phone with reluctant curiosity. I led them to the spare room, now transformed with my easel and supplies. Several practice canvases leaned against the wall, abstract explorations of color and emotion. You did these? Ella asked, genuine surprise in her voice. I'm just learning, I said. She studied one painting, a swirl of blues and purples with bursts of yellow light. This one's actually pretty good. Coming from a teenager, it was high praise indeed. Thank you, Ella. For just a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something other than disdain, a flicker of recognition, perhaps. Then she looked away, retreating behind her wall of teenage indifference. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even understanding. But it was a start. The Grand Canyon stretched before me, a vast cathedral of stone and sky. Standing on the south rim, I felt simultaneously tiny and infinite, a paradox that brought unexpected peace. I'd spent Christmas Day here, watching the sunrise paint the canyon walls in shades of amber and rose. For the first time in decades, I hadn't cooked a turkey, hadn't wrapped presents late into the night, hadn't orchestrated everyone else's perfect holiday. Instead, I joined a small group of travelers for a guided hike, then enjoyed a meal at the lodge restaurant, where I'd been seated with an elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary and a young photographer documenting national parks. We were all strangers who shared a meal and stories, finding connection without obligation. It felt like freedom. My phone had remained mostly silent. Liam sent a text with a photo of his new video game, Merry Christmas, Grandma, miss you. I'd replied with a canyon sunrise picture, Merry Christmas, sweetheart, having an adventure, nothing. From Rebecca or Ella, Margaret had called briefly. How's it feel to have a selfish Christmas? She'd asked, the smile evident in her voice. Surprisingly wonderful, I'd admitted. Now on my last day before flying home, I sat sketching the canyon's layers, using techniques from my painting class. My drawings weren't technically skilled, but they captured something essential. The majesty, the ancient patience of this place. A shadow fell across my sketchbook. I looked up to find a park ranger pausing on her rounds. That's lovely, she said, nodding at my drawing. Thank you. I'm just beginning to learn. Never too late to start something new, she replied, then continued her patrol. Never too late. The words echoed as I closed my sketchbook. I returned home on New Year's Eve to find a message from Rebecca on my answering machine. Mom, call me back. It's important. In the past, those words would have sent me rushing to the phone, heart pounding with worry. Now, I unpacked my suitcase, made a cup of tea, and only then returned the call. Mom? Rebecca sounded relieved. Where have you been? I've been calling for days. I told you I was going to the Grand Canyon for Christmas. Right, but... She hesitated. You're really hard to reach these days. I didn't apologize. What's important, Rebecca? A long pause. We need to talk about the college funds. Of course, not how was your trip, or Happy New Year, straight to what she wanted. What about them? I kept my voice neutral. Ella's starting to look at colleges. We need to know if she can count on that money. I took a deep breath. The funds are still frozen. Mom, her voice sharpened. It's been over a month. How long are you going to punish us? This isn't punishment, Rebecca. It's a boundary. A boundary? She sounded genuinely confused. What does that even mean? How could I explain to someone who had never respected limits that boundaries were acts of self-preservation, not weapons? It means I'm no longer available, emotionally or financially, without mutual respect. So you're holding Ella's future hostage until we... What? Worship? The ground you walk on? I sighed. The old pattern tugged at me. Apologize, smooth things over, put her feelings first. But I held firm. That's not what I said. But I understand it's easier to be angry than to reflect on your behavior. My behavior? She sputtered. You abandoned us at Christmas to go on vacation. I took a trip I've wanted to take for 15 years. I corrected gently. Just as you've taken many trips without me. Silence. Then, with forced calm, fine. What would it take to unfreeze the accounts? At least she was asking. It was a small step. For starters, acknowledgement. Not just of Ella's comment, but of the pattern of dismissal and taking me for granted. And then change. Real, consistent change in how I'm treated. This is ridiculous, she muttered, but without her earlier heat. I'll talk to Daniel. After we hung up, I stood by the window watching snow begin to fall, coating the winter bare branches with delicate white. The conversation had left me drained, but strangely proud. I had stated my needs without anger or apology. 3 days later, my doorbell rang. Rebecca stood on the porch, alone, her expression unreadable. Can I come in? I led her to the living room. She glanced around, noticing the changes. The new paintings on the walls, the rearranged furniture, the absence of the family photos that had once dominated the mantel. You've been redecorating, she observed, just making the space more mine. She nodded, then sat stiffly on the edge of the couch. I talked with Daniel, and with Ella. I waited. She hesitated. We may have taken advantage of your generosity over the years. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. A crack in the wall of entitlement. Thank you for acknowledging that, I said quietly. Ella has something she wants to say to you. She's outside in the car. I raised an eyebrow. Why didn't she come in? Rebecca sighed. She's 16 and embarrassed. Can you just... I walked to the front door. Through the window, I could see Ella, sitting in the passenger seat of Rebecca's car, hunched over her phone. When she saw me looking, she reluctantly got out and trudged up the walk. Hi, Grandma, she mumbled, not meeting my eyes. Hello, Ella. An awkward silence stretched between us. Mom said I have to apologize, she finally said, staring at her boots. Only if you mean it, I replied. She looked up, surprised. What? Apologies. That aren't sincere aren't worth much. If you don't mean it, I'd rather you didn't say it. She studied me with newfound wariness, as if I'd suddenly switched languages. But, don't you want me to say sorry? What I want is for you to understand why what you said was hurtful, I explained. And for you to want to apologize because you genuinely regret causing pain, not because your mother told you to. Her brow furrowed. This wasn't the script she'd expected. Can I come in? She asked finally. It's freezing out here. Inside, Rebecca watched us with nervous attention as Ella settled into an armchair. I didn't think about what I was saying, Ella began slowly. I was just trying to be funny. I didn't realize, she trailed off, her teenage eloquence failing her. You didn't realize I might actually have feelings? I suggested gently. Her eyes widened. No, yes. She took a breath. I guess I never thought about how it would feel to hear someone say they wished you hadn't survived surgery. And how would that feel to you? She winced. Really bad. I nodded. It felt really bad to me too. Silence fell again, but different this time. Thoughtful rather than defensive. I am sorry, Ella said finally, her voice small but sincere. It was a stupid thing to say. Thank you, I said. I accept your apology. Relief flooded her face. Then hesitantly, Mom said you froze our college funds. I met Rebecca's eyes over Ella's head. Yes, I did. Because of what I said? That was part of it, I acknowledged. But it was more about a pattern in our family that needed to change. What pattern? Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Ella, that's between Grandma and me. No, I said, firmly. If we're going to heal this, we need honesty. I turned back to Ella. The pattern of treating me like I only exist to give money, time, childcare, without basic respect or consideration in return. Ella's cheeks flushed. I don't do that. Not intentionally, I agreed, but you're learning from what you see. For the first time, Rebecca didn't leap to contradict me or defend herself. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, listening. It was a beginning. 6 months after that first painful Thanksgiving, I stood nervously in the community center's main gallery. My paintings, 5 carefully selected pieces, hung on the pristine white wall, part of the spring exhibition featuring students from various classes. Margaret squeezed my arm. They look beautiful, Virginia. I hardly recognize my life anymore. The woman who had once measured her worth by what she gave to others now painted 3 mornings a week, volunteered at the cancer center counseling newly diagnosed patients, and had just booked a fall trip to Maine with Margaret and 2 other friends from our painting group. Virginia? A familiar voice made me turn. Rebecca stood there, looking slightly out of place in her business attire among the casual art crowd. Beside her were Daniel, Liam, and, surprisingly, Ella. "You came," I said, unable to hide my pleasure. "We wouldn't miss your first exhibition," Rebecca replied. Her smile seemed genuine, if a bit tentative. The past 6 months had brought gradual change. After our conversation with Ella, Rebecca had suggested family counseling. I'd agreed to attend, not to fix everything immediately, but to establish healthier patterns. We'd had 5 sessions so far, with moments of progress and backsliding, but the effort itself mattered. I had unfrozen the college funds last month, not because everything was perfect, but because I'd seen consistent effort. Ella had started calling me weekly, sometimes just for 5 minutes, but the initiative meant more than the duration. "Which ones are yours, Grandma?" Liam asked, scanning the walls eagerly. I led them to my display. The centerpiece was my largest. Work. A Grand Canyon sunrise in vivid oranges and purples, more impressionistic than realistic, but capturing the feeling of that Christmas morning solitude. "You did these?" Ella sounded genuinely impressed. "Do you like them?" I asked. She nodded, studying the canyon painting. "It makes me feel peaceful, but also kind of small, in a good way." "That's exactly how the Grand Canyon feels," I smiled. Daniel cleared his throat. "They're really good, Virginia. You found a real talent." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. Rebecca stepped closer to one painting, a small blue piece with a single empty chair in a pool of light. She stared at it for a long moment. "This one," she said quietly. "It's powerful." Our eyes met, and I knew she understood. The empty chair that had once represented my exclusion now symbolized something different, space I'd created for myself, a seat I'd claimed in my own life. "We were thinking," Rebecca said hesitantly, "maybe you'd join us for dinner after the exhibition? To celebrate?" 6 months ago, I would have agreed instantly, pathetically grateful for the invitation. Now I paused, checking in with myself. "I'd like that," I said finally, "but I promised Margaret I'd help take down the exhibition. Could we meet at the restaurant in about an hour?" "Of course," Rebecca nodded, accepting my boundary without complaint. Progress. After they left to browse other exhibits, Margaret appeared at my side. "That looked positive," she observed. "It's getting better," I agreed. Slowly. "And how are you feeling about it all?" I considered the question carefully. Cautiously hopeful. But also, okay, either way. Margaret smiled. "That's the real victory. You know, not whether they change, but that you'll be fine regardless." Later that evening, I sat at a restaurant table with my family. The conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. Liam chatted about soccer, Ella showed me her college brochures, Daniel asked about my next painting project. When the waiter brought our food, Rebecca raised her glass. "To the artist," she said. "We're proud of you, Mom." Warmth spread through my chest. Not because I needed her approval anymore, but because the words felt genuine. After dinner, as we stood in the parking lot saying goodbyes, Rebecca lingered after the others headed to the car. "Mom," she began, "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving." I waited, giving her space to find her words. "We'd like you to come this year, but..." She hesitated. "If you have other plans or want to travel again, we understand." I smiled, recognizing the gift in her words, the acknowledgement of my right to choose. "Thank you," I said. "I'd like to come." As I drove home alone the evening, air cool through my open window, I felt the gentle weight of possibility. Not perfect healing. Life rarely offers that, but something sustainable. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I pulled into my driveway, my house, welcoming with lights I'd left on for myself. Inside, my easel waited by the window, a blank canvas ready for tomorrow's inspiration. Once, I would have called such contentment selfish. Now I recognized it as necessary, the oxygen mask I had finally learned to place on myself first. "It would have been better if you hadn't come back from the hospital," Ella had said all those months ago. She had been wrong. It was better, for all of us, that I had come back. Not as the same self-sacrificing woman who went in, but as someone who had finally learned her own worth. I was back at last as myself.